Good afternoon, Rabbi.
Hi, everyone.
Shalom, Rabbi Papi. Shalom, Rabbi Zucker. Shalom, Charlotte. Let's see who else is there I can't see. This
don't
is
know.
all I can see. Is
This
there
is it.
anybody else?
This is it.
This is
Well, I
it?
mean, I don't know, somebody else may come in, but a number of people are away. So I'm sorry, my computer took a while to go on and for the program to
Oh,
come.
good. Well, at least I know what went wrong.
Yeah. So I don't
You
know.
should always say that because otherwise we think there's something wrong with our stuff. And then we go nuts trying to fix whatever it is that we think is wrong with our stuff.
I can't fix any of this stuff.
I left
Technology and I don't get along too well.
Yechezkel. I left you a message asking to be admitted, and then then it
Yeah,
came-
that's right.
Sorry.
I was supposed to do that too.
I'll be right back.
Okay,
Realized, sorry, I was running to get here. First of all, let me share the screen. Be right back.
Oh, good. We can at least find a place.
Hmm. 3 times a year. That's what he's gonna do, 3 times a year.
Actually, it says 3 feet.
And I want
There's 3 feet, it's 3
3
times.
legs. Well, but the Hebrew says legs.
Which one is it? I don't know.
Shalosh
I
regalim.
used to know Hebrew better, but I don't know it.
You
much.
know what rega means. Charlotte, you're pulling my leg and the pun was intended.
Ha, ha, ha.
Okay.
All right, which word? Shall
I wanted to make sure that I have my phone since everyone's trying to reach me. I have a bad habit of course, having my phone on and leaving it in the other room. Okay,
That
so
doesn't help.
we are at Parashat Mishpatim, which you can spend a year studying this parasha or more, because there is so much material in it. It's our first collection of laws, and it's fascinating both in terms of the laws that it covers and the details of the laws, whether it's how they're presented elsewhere in the Torah as well as throughout Jewish tradition. But I want to focus on a very, very famous line, one line, and it appears actually in our parasha, but also again, and we'll talk about how many times it appears later on in the book of Exodus, and we can see they're in similar contexts. So we have towards the end of our collection of laws, a description of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, hence the word, as you discussed before, regalim. From foot is a leg is a pilgrimage festival, and of course emphasizes very often the agricultural part, but let's take a look at the section here. So would someone like to read? Lord, you can read in Hebrew and
I'll read.
okay, thanks, Charlotte.
Not in Hebrew, though.
Okay.
3 times a year. 3 times a year you shall hold a festival for me. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you, at the set time in the month of Abib. For in it you went forth from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. And the feast of the harvest of the first fruits of your work, of what you sow in the field, and the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the results of your work from the field. 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the sovereign.
Adonai. Yeah.
You shall not.
Before we go on any further, we have very clearly setting out rules for the Shalosh Regalim, which are identified by different names. They're not really different names, but they're different from the usual terms of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And of course, we have to come to the central shrine here with gifts. And now we have something added on, a number of additional laws that we assume may also have some connection to the festivals. Go ahead, Charlotte.
You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, and the fat of my festal offering shall not be left lying until morning. The choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of your God Adonai. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Well, that's
Okay,
where the kosher business comes in with the,
Well,
that's what I think.
exactly.
I don't
And
know.
It's a good business, right, Charlotte?
What, dear?
I said it's a good business.
It's a very good business. Very, very good.
Can be. It can be. So in the midst of all of these rules for the Chagim or Regalim, we have these additional laws, which also seem to be connected to the festivals. You know, you can't offer anything leavened with the festival offerings. The fat portions cannot be left until morning. They have to be burned immediately or, you know, within the evening. Again, specifics about the choice first fruits of your soil. And then this one line, Lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Milk.
Now, the question that many people raised is, what does this have to do with the festival offerings? And in fact, that's such a good question. We can ask it when these laws appear again in slightly different form later on, when we also have a renewal of the covenant. This, of course, our parasha takes place after the giving of the Aseret HaDvarim, the 10 Commandments, and this collection of laws in our parasha is known as Sefer HaBrit, the Book of the Covenant. And later on, that covenant seems to be broken with the incident of the Egel Masecha, the molten calf. And as part of the renewal of the covenant, they get these laws again. And you can read again, Charlotte.
Yes, you have to go up a little more. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm sorry. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, eating unleavened bread for 7 days, as I have commanded you, at the set time of the month of Abib. For in the month of Abib you went forth from Egypt. You shall observe the feast of weeks, of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the sovereign Adonai, the God of Israel. I will drive out nations from your path and enlarge your territory. No one will covet your land when you go up to appear before your God Adonai 3 times a year. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, and the sacrifice of the feast of Passover shall not be left lying until morning. The choice first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of your God Adonai. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk.
Okay, again, pretty much the same thing. Although, as I mentioned, there are some differences, and this is probably, at least chronologically, within the Torah, and very likely a further clarification or presentation of these laws. But again, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. And Charlotte, you're 100% correct in saying this is, you know, one of the foundations of the whole kashrut business. But here,
First of all, I was being sarcastic. I don't like calling it a business. I think we should say the mitzvah to keep kasher.
right.
But it is a business.
Business.
There are very few kosher meat markets left in the area. 5 are gone. I had to go to Muncie to buy meat, or to somewhere in New Jersey. I forgot now its name.
Well,
I
there's-
should know it.
They sell it in Foodery and West Orange. That's where we get it.
Yeah.
Foodery?
It's not so far away.
Where
Oh,
Livingston.
food is the
Not
food,
right,
is the
Livingston.
meat good there in the Foodery?
Well, Brenda and I just buy stuff that's ready to eat, not stuff that has to be cooked. So that stuff is good. I cannot speak about the stuff that has to be cooked.
I think that we've gotten from the foodery, and it seems to be fine.
sometimes they have stuff, sometimes they don't have what you're looking for. So it's,
Well, that's true. But on the other hand, it's when I've gone with my son-in-law and my daughter to Muncie, it's been a major trip. It's an hour trip,
Yeah, it's a
but we
schlep.
buy a lot.
Or you don't have
and,
to go to Muncie, go to Teaneck.
Tina,
That's a
well,
lot
now,
closer than
and
Muncie
the
is.
last two times we went to Teaneck because somebody told us about it. Lefkowitz told us about it. But other than that, it was Muncie for a couple of years. Pain in the butt, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
Why
But on
they-
the other hand, you could say it's worth the effort to keep kosher,
Oh, yeah, no.
'Cause you're
but the-
doing
and the
God's
prices are
will.
high.
okay? You know, that's, in other words, to do mitzvot, they're not supposed to necessarily be easy. Sometimes doing a mitzvah is hard, difficult, requires a lot of work. You know, buying a
Well, I
lulav
know, and-
etrog isn't that easy unless you happen to have someone selling one in the vicinity.
It's something that I've always done all my life. I've kept kosher. My mother did. And of course, when I got married, that's the way it was. And, but here's, before we get to that, the paragraph that says, no one will covet your land. Somebody's coveting our land. There's a lot of people that want to take over Israel.
Yeah.
So maybe we have to
They
go.
meant your private land, your estate. They didn't mean your country.
How do
Okay?
you know that? How do you know that?
Because it's speaking about individuals. What is being said is that you, as individuals, don't have to worry that your neighbor, knowing you're going to be gone for a whole week, is going to basically help themselves to stuff inside your home or your farm or your estate. That's what it's talking about. It is not
Are
talking
you sure?
about you're going to have an invasion. I'm
Well,
pretty sure.
I don't know.
because it's in the singular.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's probably in the Hebrew that I don't know
Right.
enough
Here it
about.
says, Lo yachmod ish et artsecha, not artsechem, but artsecha, your land in singular, not in the plural.
Oh, okay. The Hebrew that I learned was from our cantor, Hank
Rosenblum.
Rosenblum. I didn't know anything before I got here. So I knew how to keep kosher, but that was it. So he taught us a lot, and I've learned plenty over the years that I've been a member.
Sure, we knew what regel meant.
No, I didn't know that.
I'm kidding you. You know I'm kidding you, Charlotte.
I have to see you again. I haven't seen you in 3 years.
Please God, please God, please God.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, of course, is that here we have this very famous law, Lo tevashal galti b'chalev imo, and it's within the context of festival regulations. It's not necessarily in any way connected to dietary rules. Now, this law does appear one more time in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, and there it's part of the dietary laws. And to some extent, we know the trajectory of this pasuk, of this verse, within the Jewish tradition. So we're first going to look at it, this verse, within the way we think of it, the kind of the rabbinic understanding. So already you have Targum Onkelos, which is the Aramaic translation of the Bible, which is generally a pretty literal word-for-word translation. And they translate this verse, Reish Bikurei Arach, Taiti Levet Mikdasha, Adonai Eloach, Lo Techlun Basar B'chalav. The beginning of the first fruits of your land must be brought to the house of the sanctuary of Adonai your God, pretty much a straight translation. And then the end, you must not eat milk with meat.
With milk.
But the verse says you should not boil a kid in its mother's milk. But now already the Targum, the Aramaic translation, understands that this is you must not eat milk with meat. That's already their understanding. And that's true as well in another Targumic tradition. And the Targumic traditions are from really, the 2nd century before the Common Era, going into the few centuries of the Common Era. So they're, they're pretty ancient. So one other Targum, Targum Yonatan, which is not quite so literal in its translations. They begin that way. The choice first fruits of your land you must bring to the temple of Adonai, your God. Okay. But then, Ami Beit Yisrael, my people, the house of Israel, leit atun r'sha'in, la lebavashla la v'la lemechol basar v'chalav. You are permitted neither to cook nor to eat meat and milk combined. It's not in the verse. Combined. Dela, and then this is totally not in the verse. Delayit kifurugzi v'ivshel iburechon the gana the kasha terehon kachada. You can't cook or eat these things together, lest my anger rage and I cook your produce, both wheat and chaff combined.
What's chaff?
Chaff is the stuff you don't need from the wheat. They beat the wheat and
The stalk and everything but the seeds, in effect.
yeah.
It's
So-
inedible.
Yeah. And what's interesting here is not only, again, the understanding that you can't eat meat and milk together, but you can't cook it together. And not only that, if you do that, God's going to be pretty angry. You're going to destroy your harvest. And I just looked at this translation for the first time in my life when I was preparing for this class. So, I was kind of surprised. But here already,
The Yerushalmi has it too, Rabbi Papi.
pardon
Pretty
me?
much, the Yerushalmi, you're reading Yonatan, right? Pseudo Yonatan?
Yeah,
And you're talking Yerushalmi, the Yafidi has exactly the
yeah,
same.
that's what the
Or
commentaries
pretty much
say.
the same thing.
Yeah, the other Targumic traditions. So already, when we're talking about the pardon me, why am I having problems with that word? When we're talking about the Aramaic translations, the Targumic traditions, they already seem to assume what will be the rabbinic position, the position of Jewish law, and that's seen very clearly in Rashi. Charlotte, would you like to continue?
You shall not boil a kid. A calf and a lamb are included under kid. Gadi for kid means a young, tender animal, as you may find in several passages in the Torah when kid is written. But it was necessary afterwards to specify goats, as for example, I will send out a goat kid of the flock, the goat kid, 2 fine goat kids.
Yeah, those
This
are all
teaches-
translations, I should say, by Everett Fox, who wants to clarify that it is, to specify that it is a goat kid. And of course, Rashi's understanding that, it's all meat, not just goat, not just a kid,
Yeah.
which is a whole discussion in the tradition, and we're not going to go there.
We're
And
allowed to eat goats? I didn't know that.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, you're not only allowed to eat them, you're allowed to sacrifice them. They're one of the 3 acceptable sacrificial animals: cows, sheep, and goats.
No lamb.
There are animals you can eat but can't sacrifice, like deer. Okay, but the idea that an animal can be put on or an animal like chicken, you can eat it, but you can't put it on the mizbeach.
Right.
The only thing you can put on the mizbeach is a dove or a pigeon. That's pretty much the limitation. Torimu b'nei onah. So the highest level of an animal is an animal that's accepted for sacrifice, not for human consumption. And for human consumption, there are also limits, but goats are definitely permitted.
so again, as Rashi continues, building on rabbinic tradition, he picks up and he specifies even more than what the Targumic tradition presents. And the last part of the Rashi,
This teaches you that whenever an unspecified kid is mentioned, It implies also a calf and a lamb. In 3 places, this law is written in the Torah, once for the purpose of prohibiting the eating of meat with milk, once to prohibit deriving benefit, and once to prohibit the cooking.
Okay, so there are, as I said, 3 places, these 2 places in Shmot that we've just seen, and again in Devarim. And the rabbis learn 3 specific rules from, why is it written 3 times? For these 3 reasons. So already we have one body of tradition that is really, I call it the rabbinic understanding. In other words, this is the halacha, and the development of the halachic tradition. But then our tradition also sought to get behind it and figure out, okay, why? Because we also recognize, our tradition recognized that lo tevashel gedi b'chalei vimo in Devarim is part of the dietary laws, but within Sefer Shmot, it's not. So there might be more to this law than just simply a dietary restriction. And there are a number of mafarshim that make this same point. The first one being Rashbam. Well, not only the first one, but certainly Rashbam. And I'll just.
By the way, the point Rashi makes that Gedi includes non-goat is not true. I just searched it. It definitely is not true. Gedi refers to goats and only to goats.
Yeah, hence, Fox's translation. But I think you're right, he's not correct about this, but what he's trying to say that halachically, even though it says Gedi, talking about a goat, halachically, any other domestic animal, we cannot cook with meat, cook with dairy.
So we can't even cook with fowl, and nobody could ever talk about chalei mimo with fowl.
Yeah, that's all. Absolutely correct.
That's that later extension.
Yeah. Oh, no, I mean, there's a whole discussion in the Gemara, and even in the Mechilta, they talk about this. That's, a whole nother discussion of why is a fowl considered meat. I don't remember. I think we've talked about this in the past.
It's an argument between 2 Tana and Rav Yossi. I
Right.
agree with
And
things
Right.
that it's permissible to cook with fowl or eat with fowl. Yeah, and Rabbi Akiva doesn't, and the halacha goes like Rabbi Akiva. So basically, that's obviously must have been 2 customs. Rabbi Yosef was represented a region, and Rabbi Akiva represented a different region until the Bar Kokhba revolt, and then he never made it up to the Galil. But Rabbi Yosef was stationed.
Really was permitted to do it because he got it as a major tradition, but his sons, having only learned it from him, the next generation, they cut it off.
Anyway, I
Um,
think let's see what Rashbam says.
so let's Rashbam lo tevashel b'chalei vimo, in the verse, derech ha'izim laledet shnei gediyim yachad. It is usual for goats to give birth to 2 kids at the same time. And you can read the commentaries. There's some who say, yes, there is a great deal of truth in that. I know nothing about animal husbandry, so you can't go by me. The regilim hayu lishchot echad mehem, and it was customary to slaughter one of them. Umitoch sherov chalav beizim, and they would use the milk because certainly the mother giving birth would have more milk, and they would use the milk to cook at kedich. And there, I guess also, goats were the most common animals, and most of their milk came from goats. Kedichtiv, as it's written, V'dai chalav izim l'lachmecha, etc. The goat's milk will suffice for your food of your household, the maintenance of your maids, in Proverbs. But the sense is that goat milk was very, very common. Hayu regilim levashlo b'chalev em. It was their custom to cook it, this new kid, in the mother's milk. Ulefi ha'oved diber hakatuv. And the verse was speaking like within its own time. And Rashbam goes on to say, Uknai hu davar uvliya verav tanut lechol chalav im habanim. It's somewhat distasteful, revolting, something akin to gluttony to consume mother's milk together with its children. So first of all, what's Rashbam's claim that one reason we don't do it, even though it was customary?
Disgusting.
Yeah, exactly. And even more so, it's disgusting on a different level. Vidugmazo, and an example of this, trying to explain the reason behind it. Let me go right to the English. It and its child, we have a prohibition elsewhere in the Torah not to slaughter a mother animal and her young on the same day. And we also have the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird. If you come across a nest and there are chicks in it, you can't take the chicks. You have to send the mother away first. And Rashbam explained, to teach you a cultured way has scripture commanded you, seeing that on the festivals many animals are consumed. In this passage of the pilgrimage festivals, the Torah warns against cooking and eating a kid in its mother's milk. This is the rule for all meat and milk, as our rabbis taught in the slaughter of chulin, and really in the laws of chulin slaughter. So basically, it's not just that it's disgusting, it's also kind of morally repugnant, to teach you in a cultured way, and they're putting the laws here because festivals, that's when they really ate meat, because that's when they brought their sacrifices to the temple in Jerusalem. And specifically because they're eating a lot of meat, they wanted to make sure that this law was taught. And he connects it to these other laws in the Torah that seem to show some compassion for the animals.
By the way, I just checked on Wikipedia. The bit
Yeah.
about the twins is true.
Okay. That's cool.
Just
Yeah,
look up the article, goats on Wikipedia, and they'll tell you, they could have 1, 2, or 3, but 2 is the most frequent that they have.
Yeah, I thought I saw that in Sarna's commentary.
Okay.
Yeah. Ibn Ezra, in talking about this law, says, "Ve'en lanu tzarich levakesh ma tam isuro." There's no need for us to search for the reason of its prohibition, because the reason is hidden from the eyes of the intelligent. In other words, we don't know the rationale, and we'll come back to this. And Ibn Ezra suggests, Ulai hayaki achzariyut levhu levashel hagadim chalev imo. Perhaps it's just, how do they translate it here? It's possible that it is very cruel to see the kid in its mother's milk. And again, he brings in the same verses as Rashbam. Kederech v'shor oseh oto ve'peno lo tishchatu. The law elsewhere in the Bible, and whether it be a cow or an ewe, you shall not kill it and its young both on one day. And also, you shall not take the mother with the young. So Rashbam, Ibn Ezra very clearly are seeing this as this law is to oppose cruelty. There's something just nasty and mean, the idea of killing, of cooking the kid in its mother's milk. And then one more on this one is Bechor Shor, who says, Va'amet ki asar basar levashel bechalav. Truth is, or the real reason that we forbid the milk and meat together, or boiling a kid in its mother's milk, ki hachalav shegodlo v'chai mimenu ich tivash lubo. How can we take the milk from which it was grown and from which it is sustained? How can you cook in it? There is something kind of revolting about the notion, which we'll also come back to. the mother which produced the child, and would presumably sustain it with its milk, the idea of using that very milk to cook it is really just not right. And again, he connects it, Bechor Shor, as Rashbam and as Ibn Ezra, with the same mitzvot in the Torah. And he explains, V'shahu derech akzariyut. This is just cruelty. And this part of Bechor Shor, which he also says later on, this is actually what he says here, but he also says it later on in his commentary on chapter 34 in Exodus. He says, "V'lo mishum she'akadosh baruch hu chas al habema," and it's not because God is showing compassion for the animal. But he wants that Israel should not behave with cruelty.
According to my footnotes here, that comment is not certain. It's in the manuscript.
Yeah, that's
it's put in brackets.
Yeah, but it does, and it's also true in the later commentary. So, but whoever put it there,
Maimonides.
it's probably a little bit different than we might think about it. We would think about the compassion for the animals, and I don't think it's at all a stretch to say that there is compassion for animals. We have enough laws regarding how animals are treated in the Bible, and the sense that God cares about the animals. Remember, God saves the animals as well as the human beings at the time of the flood. And even when God is about to destroy Nineveh, and Jonah seems to care only about the plant that is getting him shade and not about the people of the city. He said, why? Shouldn't you're concerned about the plant that you did nothing for? Shouldn't I be concerned about all the people? And also, there's so much cattle, So I think to see God having compassion for animals is not a stretch, and in fact, that becomes an important category in Jewish law of tsar ba'alei chayim, that we're forbidden from causing pain to living creatures.
Rabbi Popke,
Yeah.
I think the reason why you have statements such as the one we had in the brackets and elsewhere you have such statements, they all go back, I think, to that Mishnah Masechet Brachot that says, if a person says, Ad kansi por yagiu rachamecha, mashti kimoto, sha'oset midotav sha'akotosh baruch hu rachamim, ve'enam ela gezerot. Now, ela gezerot. Now, that to me represents one opinion in the Mishnah. It certainly is not Pshat in Tanakh. If what you're trying to teach is Pshat in Tanakh, I don't think there's any question that Tanakh is concerned about cruelty to animals, and there's no end of proofs. Look at the difference between Abraham and Bilam. Bilam is the great leader. Well, how do we know he's a great leader? Because he beats his animal, meaning he's not a. Somebody who beats his animal is that already shows what you can expect from him. In other words, that's a character trait. It's brought out straight there. In other words, I don't think there's, in fact, the Mishnah has to tell us to shut somebody like that up. It simply means that the Mishnah knows perfectly well that that's what most people think. And something, they're going to continue to think that whether the Mishnah likes it or not.
Let me just explain that Mishnah. In the first tractate in Brachot, where you have the rules for Shema and a number of things, but mostly Shema and Amidah, and they object to certain things being repeated or certain things being added. Part of their concern are sectarian comments or additions, or people who may be leading the service who really aren't committed to, say, rabbinic Judaism, and they bring in a couple of examples of someone talking about God's compassion for the mother bird. And again, as Yehudi pointed out, they say, you can't try and put human emotions on God. God commands us, and that's why we do it. And that's certainly, a very well attested perspective within rabbinic literature and throughout the Jewish tradition. We have, there are a number of laws that are given before Sinai. There are a number of laws that seem to come to non-Jews. We have the notion of the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 basic commandments that for a civilized society, that, even if it's a non-Jewish society. But, you also have statements that say, but the non-Jews have to believe that it comes from God, and it was God who commanded it. So, there are, it's not just, some general morality, but it's really something that comes directly from God. And even the 613 mitzvot, even if some of them may have been given before Sinai, they were irrelevant until they were given at Sinai. So, but yet another interpretation of Lo Teveshel Gedi B'Chalei V'Mu was raised by Rambam. And it's one that everybody loves, because it's a very kind of a modern perspective. Charlotte, do you want to read this one? For Maimonides?
As for the that's the one that said, as for the prohibition
Yeah.
against eating meat boiled in milk, it is, in my opinion, not improbable that in addition to this being undoubtedly very gross food and very filling, idolatry had something to do with it. Perhaps such food was eaten at one of the ceremonies of their cult or at one of their festivals. A confirmation of this may, in my opinion, be found in the fact that the prohibition against eating meat boiled in milk, when it is mentioned for the first 2 times, occurs near the commandment concerning pilgrimage, 3 times a year, and so on.
Yeah, there is just quoting the verse.
It is as if it is said, when you go on pilgrimage and enter the house of the Lord your God, do not cook there in the way they used to do. According to me, this is the most probable view regarding the reason for this prohibition. But I have not seen this set down in any of the books of the Sabians that I have read.
So his
Who are
supposition,
the Sabians?
they're kind of a
That's his terminology for biblical period or pre-biblical period
non-Israelites.
non-Jews.
Yeah.
Oh, non-Jews.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, he's saying that looking at the context, this seems to be an anti-pagan polemic. The problem is, I've not been able to find this practice among the pagans. It just seems like that, but I haven't found it. And
Sparno also says something like that.
pardon me?
Sparno from Renaissance
Yes.
Italy.
Yeah, and
Also
we're
something like
actually in a
that.
moment going to read Rabbi Levi Ben Gershon, who says something very, very similar. But here in the footnote, it's not only Rambam who liked this interpretation, but contemporary scholars have liked it. And there's a quote from Brevard Childs, his commentary on Exodus. He says, the final prohibition has long, that is the final prohibition here in this list of laws, the Lo Teveshel Gedi B'Chalei V'Mo, as long interested commentators and called forth various explanations. And then he says, new light has been thrown on this text by the Ugaritic parallel. Unfortunately, the text is broken in one place and must be restored. That is the so-called Ugaritic parallel. Nevertheless, even if the difficulties are admitted, the probability that this is indeed a parallel text is high. Accordingly, the biblical prohibition was directed specifically against a Canaanite ceremony, which was probably connected with the fertility cult. That's what Childs writes. However,
There's rabbis, I'm under the impression that that's been already, let's just say, disproven if you don't mind, I'd like to hear what Rabbi Zucker says about that.
Well, actually, I was just going to go on to the next paragraph. that I
Okay,
have
fine.
here. It should be mentioned that the Ugaritic text mentioned by Childs upon closer and better examination was found not to be a parallel at all. That apparently they were able to view it better, see it better. How they, again, Ugaritic is a consonantal text as Hebrew, so how they space the letters. So it doesn't really seem that it's talking at all about a kid being boiled in its mother's milk. This is from an article I didn't finish really by Alan Cooper. Once again,
Our
seething
professor
kid
from
in
the
its mother's
JTS.
milk. Exactly. He did it
Okay.
in 2012. So,
But you could send us the link.
yeah. So
Well,
it's the reality is that it sounds great. However, we don't have any evidence. And here
Also,
again,
there's no evidence in our own text. In other words, the places where Lo Torah Gediva Chalevi Mo are inserted, all three of them are not talking about Avodah Zarah. They're simply not. They're talking about something else. Well, like you said, the first two are talking about what you should do when you come to the temple, and the third is talking about kosher food in general. But it certainly is not. It is not placed in the context of wars against pagan practices. So I think basically that in itself shows that that's not what it's about. And I don't have the slightest problem with saying that it's about Tzar Baalei Chayim. That's out there. That's clear. That's in the Torah. That's all over the place. What do I need to basically sit there and start saying it's some kind of a slap against a pagan practice that no one's ever been able to even prove is a pagan practice?
right. And that's but again, it was a very, very popular position. So, of course, it became exceedingly well known through Rambam and his influence on Judaism. But we see as well Ralbag, Levi Ben Gershon, makes a similar comment. Perhaps it was the custom of the ancient nations to boil meat and milk in their idolatrous temples. And when they celebrated their festivals, their idolatrous festivals. And the Torah forbids this practice to us. If we do not find this written among their customs, it is because the impression left by the laws of those nations was lost over time, and because of the Torah's polemic against them. In other words, their stuff, we haven't found it because it was lost. And also Judaism's polemic against them was one. And he still thinks, I think that the admonition comes in Parashat Ki Tisa for this reason. It appears that the commandments mentioned there are intended to distance us from idolatry because of the incident of the calf. Now that is adding kind of a clever reason in the sense that the law in Shmot Lamed Daled in Exodus 34 comes after the incident of the golden calf. So, I think there he's on slightly stronger ground, but you're right. We don't really have anything that clear, that specific. And then
The only thing he could hang on
nobody's found it.
is that in Shemot 34, the festival laws are introduced with the statement Elohim Aseh Lo Taseh.
Yeah.
I thought, fine, he can hang on that, but given some serious proof that this is really the case, I think we should leave the Tzar Baalei Chayim interpretation as our main one, because that's supported by Pshat and the other ones are not.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things that I'll get to Alan's article in a moment. But he also brings in an interesting comment from the Klei Yakar, 19th century commentator. Many commentators have gone out to glean the reason for this commandment. Lo tevashel gediva chalevi mo, you shall not see the kid in its mother's milk, but they have been unsuccessful to the point that some classify it as one of the laws that cannot be explained rationally. The literal term is they have no reason known to us. And, we are familiar with the designation in rabbinic literature that there are mishpatim, chukim, and mishpatim. The mishpatim, we can discern a rationale for these mitzvot. Chukim are those that we just don't understand, but God commanded them, we do them. So, and then he quotes some of the things that have been said. Some say that cooking meat in milk was a pagan festival practice, which is why the commandment is attached from the festival laws. Others bring proof from what is written, and as for Abel, he too brought from the firstborn of his flock from their fat parts, for they used to make offerings of meat and milk. This is an unusual.
Wait a minute. Caleb and Chalev were two different things.
Yes.
It's not Mechalev Imo, it's Mechalev Imo.
Yeah.
Milk and fat are two completely different things. I mean, yeah, they happen to have similar three-letter roots, but that's like Mashal governor and Mashal proverb. It's Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2.
Yeah, no, very clearly. I see your Cooper points out that this is an unusual, not a standard, though not unheard of interpretation. You know, it's out there. It's not, but Kli Yakar is only bringing in some opinions that he has found. But what he says is a little bit more interesting, is it makes more sense that this mitzvah is from the matter of forbidden mixtures and confusion of forces. The confusion of forces is a Kabbalistic reference, not important to us at the moment.
This is Cooper?
Pardon me?
This Cooper you're quoting now?
Yeah, so here, building on Kli Yakar, the idea of forbidden mixtures, he examines the continuation of the Kli Yakar's commentary, as well as other sources that deal with ancient conceptions of how the human being is formed, and the relationships between blood, semen, breast milk, and flesh. And this is what he writes. And you know, this is just Rashi Prakim here. It's not really doing justice to his comment. I only read this quickly, so I can't.
I wouldn't believe this.
But if the Israelites understood the mother's milk to be clarified menstrual blood, and the flesh of her offspring to be formed of the same material, that fact in itself would account for the milk meat taboo. The injunction would be a logical corollary to the general prescription of eating flesh with blood. The meat must not be recombined with what is effectively the identical substance, the life force that may not be consumed. Now, again, this is all based on ancient conceptions, not how we understand things today. But if indeed this was the notion, or part of the notions that they had in the ancient world, then this is Kli Yakar, this is Cooper reading Kli Yakar's comment that Lo Tevashel Gadi B'Chalev Imo makes more sense in looking at it as part of the things that are forbidden because of forbidden mixtures. And in fact, he points to this midrash in Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael, Isi Omer, V'lo tochal hanefesh im habasar. You shall not eat the life with the flesh. That's in Deuteronomy. Lahavi basar b'chalav shasor ba'achila. To include meat cooked in milk as forbidden to be eaten. So the midrash already connects the command not to eat meat and milk, or this, well, I should say, this notion of milk and meat is already being put into the category of forbidden mixtures. And then he also points out there's a midrash that kind of expands on this when it says, "Vomer lo tochal nefesh ima basar, lavi basar b'chalav shehu asor b'achila, shaharei hadam ne'akar v'ne'aseh chalav." You must not consume the life with the flesh, to include milk and meat, which is forbidden for consumption because the blood is clarified and becomes milk. Again, ancient notions, not our notions.
Become clarified, Rabbi.
Pardon me?
How do you translate the word ne'ekar into clarified?
He translates it as clarified.
Spoiled. I just don't get how that word goes into English clarified. We
That's
know
how
what
he
the word
trans-
means. It means
Yeah.
to spoil. It means to, achatemoti, you know. Um, uh, uh, by the way, though, you don't have to send me Cooper's article. I got it already in front of me. But I do think that that's a meritorious interpretation, because there's a one problem with the cruelty to animals thesis, which is it isn't exactly clear what the cruelty is in this nature,
Right.
in this act, whereas it's perfectly clear when you say lo tocha ha'emin habanim, or when you say otovi epinolo tishkatu biyom echad. In this case, what I guess the cruelty is that the mother has to see her newborn child being eaten right smack, and it's her milk that she was going to give to that child is now instead being used to cook the child. That's how I
would
always
connect
saw
it with the sending away the mother.
I'm
Or
saying
that's
I
what.
always thought that the cruelty
Mhm.
in Lo Tavashel Gediva Chalevimo is the cruelty that the mother goat has to see that its child goat is now being roasted or cooked in its own milk, which was intended to feed the child goat. It's a visual, not a pain thing like whipping the donkey. Okay. The pain is that the animal has to see something that's going to make it unhappy.
Yeah. So, and then he also brings in, I think, a fascinating feminine interpretation, which, I like I said, it's fascinating. Could, like many modern interpretations, be just as much midrash as anything else. But he finishes his article. The conundrum of the kid law is probably insoluble given the state of both the evidence and our knowledge. We should reckon with the possibility that the law is a vestige or survival of an ancient taboo for which the explanation is irretrievably lost. It is conceivable that its raison d'etre was unknown even to the biblical authors who recontextualized it in its three settings. There is no rationale inherent in the law itself, nor is there any reason to assume that a single underlying principle would account adequately for every detail. After reviewing the history of interpretation and the arguments on behalf of the various alternatives, he goes on to say that his conclusion is in favor of the synthesis of the Kli Yakar and the modern feminist interpretation, a synthesis that places proper weight on both the pre-scientific natural history, the gender ideology themselves intimately
What's the
related,
modern feminist
that
interpretation?
arguably lie behind the law. So
Well,
again,
what time are you going to be there? Because I know you go around.
so basically,
What is the modern feminist interpretation? I missed it.
I can't do it justice, and we're running out of
Okay,
time.
fine.
I would
I'll
read it in
the
the
article.
article because he's biased because it's his student that wrote the article. And he admits
I
it.
didn't
That's
know
what
that.
he says that. He said he clearly says it's a very, very cute line.
I see it. The gender ideology
Yeah.
themselves.
And it's a very interesting approach.
Okay.
And I
you
think
for,
it's certainly a
referring us to it.
possibility. I think, however, that certainly for our tradition, for contemporary Judaism, we definitely see it much more along the lines of a moral injunction. That's certainly very much within the context of the Torah. And we also know that the dietary laws most definitely have a moral rationale behind some of them, or certainly a component. So, but, very, I thought I had, studied this pasuk, but there's a lot there. There's a lot more. Absolutely fascinating to think how our tradition has tried to come to grips with it. Even, clearly understanding that, however we practice it in terms of all the different kinds of separations of milk and meat, That's certainly the practical consequence. The significance, however, that's something that we continue to reflect on. That was interesting bit on a very famous part of our parasha. Again, there's so much else in here. There's the law of lex talionis, an eye for an eye. There's the whole question of why does a people just released from slavery begin with laws of slavery? How do we treat the stranger? What does that mean? How has that been understood? And then even the end of the parasha, where basically Moshe, Aaron, and the elders have a picnic with God. It's really just a lot of really fascinating stuff. This parasha of law is anything but dry. And I'm afraid I have to run.
Rabbi Pop.
All right, so have a good day, everybody.
Thanks for the article reference too.
Okay. Bye.
He-